The history of cinema is weird. It's deeply weird. And the deeper you dig into it, the weirder it gets, which is one of the many reasons I love being a film buff. I like writers more than I like directors. The flawed, damaged and wondrously talented people who create the stories that other people make into movies have, for no good reason, been second-class citizens in the dream factories of the world. We've known that ever since Joe Gillis was found face down in Norma Desmond's swimming pool. But there's one writer who was killed by the movie that was made from one of his novels, and that's the story for today. J'irai cracher sur vos tombes, which translates in English to I Spit on Your Graves, is a 1959 French thriller based on a 1946 pulp novel by Vernon Sullivan. Directed by Michel Gast, it's a steamy, sultry tale of a light-skinned black man called Joe Grant, played by 1950s French movie heartthrob Christian Marquand, who was of Spanish and Algerian ancestry. Joe lives in Memphis, Tennessee with his much darker brother, who is in a relationship with a white woman. That leads to the brother being lynched by a white mob, and Joe, grieving, improvises a cremation for his brother. Then goes to see his white friend Lex, who gives him a letter to take to Trenton, New Jersey, and Lex's friend Horace Chandley, who runs a bookstore and will give Joe a job. Joe has decided to pass for a white man and goes to work for Chandler in his bookstore in New Jersey. Trenton is controlled by a gangster, Stan Walker, who is about to marry local heiress Elizabeth Shannon, played by Antonella Lualdi, who is attracted to Joe, as is her sister Sylvia, and pretty much every young woman in town. And Joe gets horizontally successful with most of them. Joe finds Trenton no less racist than Memphis had been, observing it as a man of colour pretending to be white. He and Elizabeth fall in love, which brings Joe into conflict with Stan Walker and his gang. Rather than focusing on the racial plot themes of the original novel, Gast concentrates on the steamier aspects of the situation. He throws in some aesthetically pleasing nudity, which is par for the course in French cinema in the late 1950s, but utterly taboo in Anglophone markets at the time. The acting is okay, but the evocation of 1950s America is ludicrous. None of the actors look, act or dress like Americans. Memphis, Tennessee doesn't have a seaport like this one. And Trenton, New Jersey doesn't have picturesque hills and forests like this. The movie was filmed in Studios de la Vitrine in Nice in the south of France, and it looks like it. It's mildly entertaining and utterly silly at the same time. It's worth checking out, but not much more than that. The 1946 novel was written in Paris just after the war, which was an incredibly wonderful time for the city. All the American movies that couldn't be seen there for the previous 5 years were suddenly in cinemas. All of the American jazz records the French missed out on were available. And chain-smoking young cinephiles got together to enjoy this tsunami of popular culture. From this time and place we get the concept of film noir and cahiers de cinema. In this sudden freedom in Paris, the author wrote I Spit on Your Graves in 2 weeks, 2 in a bet. To this day, all 4 of the Vernon Sullivan novels are collector's items. I Spit on Your Graves, The Dead All Have the Same Skin, To Hell with the Ugly, and They Do Not Realise. The author had an awe-inspiring talent for writing great titles. In spite of its unorthodox origin, the novel I Spit on Your Grave sold well for 3 years, and in 1948 there was even a stage adaptation. Unfortunately, in 1949 the French government banned it, calling it pornography, because in those days, like our own, governments just don't want people to enjoy themselves. Later, the novel was re-released and sold 500,000 copies. De Paris n'importe. Vernon Sullivan didn't actually exist. He was a pseudonym for one of the most interesting Frenchmen of the post-war era, a prolific polymath, a writer, a poet, musician, playwright, singer, translator, music critic, social critic, actor, inventor and engineer, who was friends with Hoagy Carmichael, Miles Davis, Duke Ellington, Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir and Albert Camus. The man also translated Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep and The Lady in the Lake into French, and also had a go at translating science fiction with A.E. Van Vocht's The World of Null-A. His name was Boris Vian. People who know Boris Vian mostly know about his music. His songs Je Bois and Je Suis Snob are harshly cynical, and his plaintive song Le Deserteur became an anthem for anti-war protesters. He also wrote 6 other novels in his own name, 4 short story collections, 7 plays, and 3 books of poetry. And Boris Vian didn't like what CTI, the film studio, did with his novel. He hated their adaptation of I Spit on Your Graves. During the movie's production, he argued with the producers, he denounced it publicly in the newspapers, and he asked that his name be taken off the credits. This brings us to the morning of the 23rd of June 1959 and Cinema Marbeuf in Paris. CTI is previewing their movie version of I Spit on Your Graves. Boris Vian is in the audience and he's not a happy camper. He knows that the movie concentrates more on the salacious aspects of the novel instead of the more important themes of racism and race-based violence. The movie starts, and several minutes into the film, Boris Vian, according to eyewitnesses, stands up and yells at the screen. He says, "These guys are supposed to be Americans, my ass!" And then he has a heart attack and he dies en route to hospital at the age of 39. This is probably the moment that killed him, and yeah, none of these actors in the lynch mob look or dress like Americans. After his death, Vian's reputation increased. His impertinent songs and the vast range of his achievements and his wildly inventive imagination have made him a well-loved part of 20th century popular culture. And that's the story of how a movie killed its author. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. I really like French cinema of the 1950s. There are some really interesting hidden gems there. Until next time, take care of yourselves, wear a mask, wash your hands, and I'll be back with something else very, very soon. And I'll see you next time. Vagabonde aux flots bleus et bruns.